I'm part of a team studying what happens to human consciousness after we die. What happens when we die? Where do we go? What does it feel like? Is there a heaven, a hell? We didn't know, but we wanted to. I suppose that's where everything went wrong, right out of the gate. We wanted to play God, or at least learn the rules of the game, to see behind the curtain for just a moment, if only so we could know what to expect when the lights went out and we said that final goodnight. I'm telling you now, swearing to you that we never intended for things to go wrong the way that they did. The people that lost their lives knew what they were getting into. They signed releases, paperwork. They agreed to let us do what we did, just so long as we promised to handsomely compensate their families. And we did. We held up our end of the bargain to do the tune of $13 million. But things like this, they never work out the way that they're meant to. I knew that. I did. But think that on some level, all of us did. But the people who were funding us had no idea. They wanted results be messy, they said. That's what it takes. Do whatever you need to do to figure out what happens in the sequel to life and make it snappy, because this funding is running on an hourglass. And that said, and that sand is slipping. So, we cut corners. We pushed people in ways that, in retrospect, were irresponsible, dangerous. But we did it for the common good. We did it for you, for all of us, for the benefit of future generations who could look at death in the eye without the horror of not knowing what came next. It was a good thing. It really was. We called it Project Afterlife. Connect. Amanda, do we have a connection? We do. Ready when you are. Initiate afterlife sequence. Subject 1, female, in her 30s, suffered catastrophic liver failure, excessive use of alcohol related. They've been dead for 3 days. No one has ever come back after 3 days. The point was to let them taste the cold kiss of death and then tear their soul back into the land of the living, long enough to give us a play-by-play of what happened while they were away. The 3-day timeline was a tricky one. Even though the corpse was dead, even though the cadaver was cold and beginning to cellularly decompose, we needed to keep it fresh enough to host life. Don't get me wrong, the life it hosted didn't last long, but it lasted long enough. I still remember the pulse of the excitement that shot through the room when the woman opened her eyes. Initiating afterlife sequence. Agnes, can you hear my voice? Where am I? You're with friends, safe. Do you remember the study you agreed to be a part of? Death? Death. That's right, Agnes. We wanted to know what happened to the soul after death, and you agreed to take the journey and return to us. You're the first human being to have done so. Congratulations. We belong to them. Agnes, I'm sorry. To whom are you referring? We belong to the forgotten. Hold her. What comes next is worse than any hell. The machine monitoring her vitals began to beep violently and dictating levels were grossly out of range. Agnes Mick had died for the second time. We had her corpse carted to the morgue for an autopsy and discovered that her brain had subsequently swelled up, causing her skull to crack open. Her heart had partially ruptured in her chest. And most bizarrely of all, her vocal cords had been seared as if something had lit them aflame. Her results were ominous, to say the least, but we were intelligent enough to know that a sample size of one does not make a conclusion, and so we eagerly awaited our second subject. This one was a young girl named Charlotte. She'd been struck by a vehicle and hit and run and fallen into a coma. Her parents never had the opportunity to say goodbye, so they agreed to allow us to perform the study so long as they were there for her revival. They're worried but hopeful. I don't know if he really wants this. Subject 2, female, teenager, was hit by a speeding vehicle. I clicked a few keys on the computer console, and the machine began its mechanical song. A moment later, and the screen flashed green. It initiated its afterlife sequence. Charlotte's unmoving cadaver was filled with a myriad of chemicals and electrical pulses designed to shock her brain into functioning. The girl's feet began to twitch, then her fingertips. Her mother and fathers looked at one another, grasping hands as if they waited for their daughter to return to them. Hopeful, tears leaked from the corners of their eyes, their lips mouthing silent words of affirmation as they prepared to say goodbye to their daughter. But then, difficult to describe the sound of Charlotte's scream. I'm hesitant to say it was human, let alone the sound of a teenage girl. It was most similar, I feel, to a drowning sheep. It was an anguish, bleeding sound, one that seemed never ending, and yet told a terrifying story all on its own. Eventually, Charlotte's parents made the decision to pull the plug on their daughter. It was the second time they'd made that decision in a little under a week. The last subject was the one that stuck with me, the one that haunts me to this day, and the reason I'm writing this now, sharing this with all of you. His name was Jacob. He was sentenced to death after doing some gruesome things to some tribal villages while traveling in South America. He'd been researching for material to a book he was writing called The Meaning of Life. He participated in hundreds of rituals across dozens of tribes. He tried everything from leveraging and drug he could get his hands on that promised psychedelic insight. Things went wrong, however, when he went on a bloody rampage during the psychotic episode. That's why he approached our small project and asked to be included. When we informed him it was only for those suffering from terminal afflictions, he asked if he could be added to the list anyway. Sort of like an organ donor. We agreed. Jacob was sent to the electric chair the following weekend. Subject 3, male in his 40s, was sentenced to death after killing multiple tribal villagers in South America. Once again, I watched from behind the glass. Once again, Roger waited patiently, hopeful smile on his face. 20 seconds passed and nothing occurred. Not so much as the twitch of a toe or flick of an eyelash. Jacob's corpse remained every bit as dead as the day we carted him in. A minute went by and we still saw no sign of resurrection. Amanda, can you check the monitors? I think it might be malfunctioning. I swallowed. I triple-checked the machines and made sure it was functioning to specification, just as it had the last 2 times. The wires checked out. The program was running to spec. All of those were in the correct places. I don't see any issue here. Maybe some people can't be brought back. Have you seen it? Jacob, do you remember the study you agreed to participate in? I remember everything. I've seen too much. And what was that? What came next after you died? Everything that I feared. The nightmares were real. What did you think happened after we died, Doctor? I'm not certain. We all believe different things. I suppose we were hoping you could answer that for us, Jacob. We believe. Believe. We believe so many different things, and we so desperately want them to be true. But the only truth is that we return to the forgotten. The forgotten was a phrase we heard before from Agnes. I'd assume it referred to human beings, like those who died in meaningless wars or in periods of widespread misfortune. And yet, the emphasis that Jacob placed upon it. The forgotten? What are the forgotten? It was miraculous that he was standing at all, but that he remained living after several minutes. Something neither of us others 2 subjects managed. Now what? But who? Our minds are finally made to evolve over millennia to mask reality, to mask the bitter truth of the universe. You want to know what happens when we die? We return to the abyss that birthed us. I had a vision. At the end, I saw our makers. They were dressed in dying stars and empty space. They were hopeless, empty, but just like us, they wanted medicine, a way to feel. What are the medicine? Their minds are primed for love, for joy, for pleasure. And when we die, they feed on us. They leave our souls empty and rotting until we rebirth into the next human. A little less whole, a little less complete. A little closer to putting a bullet through our skulls. What else can you tell us? That we began with meaning. But as they fed and they fed, we grew emptier, more incomplete. Collectively, the human soul withered. Look around you. Do you feel the rage, the hatred, the pain? It's consuming the human race like a plague. And bit by bit, we're getting worse, not better. Soon we'll have nothing left to feel. No love, no joy, just emptiness. Roger's mouth hung open. His voice stuttered as he attempted to formulate a response, to articulate why he must be wrong. At least, that's what I had hoped for. I'd hoped for anybody to stand up and say this was all a farce, and that the experiment had been compromised, and none of this could be true, but nobody did. If you want to know what comes next, I can show you. After that, our funding was pulled. Our donor abandoned the project after his involvement from any and all corporate records. As far as the scientific community was concerned, the experiments never occurred and the findings didn't exist. But I remember. I remember because there's simply no way I could forget the haunting look in Agnes's eyes, the hopeless agony of Charlotte's screams, and the final message that Jacob delivered in a pool of blood on the linoleum floor. It was messy and easy to miss. To the others, I think it must have looked like a common splatter, simple side effect of his legs spasming in the pool of blood. But I know what I saw. The letters, through crooked and barely legible, were scorched into the memory like a cattle brand. They weren't so much a warning as they were words of advice, perhaps answer to the question we set out to answer, and the question that Jacob had set out to answer in his book. The meaning of life, he wrote, is to avoid the agony of death.